Welcome to UX and Coffee with Jen and Kendall. Welcome, Kendall.
Hi, welcome. Well, thank you. Actually, thank you. I'm not your co-host. I'm your guest. Thank you.
You are kind of a co-host too. How's
Yeah,
it going
and
over
I'm very
there?
happy
What
to be
time is
here.
it? What was that?
I'm happy to be here. It's 8 a.m. in Hawaii, and yes, I just finished a little workout. That's why I look like this.
Oh,
So
you look great.
apologies that I have not showered, but
You look great. You know what? It's like blush. Like people spend a lot of money to look like this. So maybe this is the secret. Work out and then
yeah,
hop into an online meeting.
the new NARS blush. Yes.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm so
So,
excited for you to be here. I love seeing you and talking to you, and I love how our relationship and our collaborations have evolved through the years. And actually, maybe we can start there. Why don't we tell folks how we met, and then we'll get into the thing what I wanted to talk about, which was leaving corporate UX jobs for other passions that you have that I have. But that's kind of part of our story too. So yeah, do you want to share how we met?
yeah, totally. So I created a really amazing set of retreats in Hawaii coming out of the pandemic when people kind of needed these mind, body, soul, energetic refreshes. And so I rented a beachside mansion and just created the quintessential Hawaiian experience and a lot of people in tech came, a lot of remote professionals, because that was a lot of my network, and then also a lot of entrepreneurs, and we had this mesh pot of individuals, between 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 each week, and basically Jen came to that. Jen was one of the participants. And so we had each of the activities were like mind, body, soul. So we did things like the body aspect of workouts and surf lessons. Jen, you didn't do the surf lessons, but because you're fear of water, but
However,
um
however, I will say because of that experience at that retreat, I want to learn how to swim and I want to learn how to surf because I had no idea. So for those of you who don't know, I'm not a very good swimmer. I can doggy paddle, I can get by, but I'm not a
you can
strong
doggy paddle. That's right.
yeah, I'm not a strong swimmer. So like going out and surfing, learning to surf with this group was just like, nah, it's cool. I'll stay on the shore and take photos instead. But I loved the lessons that the group was getting back at the house. We had an instructor who came and they would watch the videos and fast forward and rewind and fast forward and rewind and pay very detailed attention to like these minor movements on the board. And I was just like, this is amazing. And I also loved when you all were out there on the other side of the waiting for a wave to come. I loved that I don't know, socializing. Like it seems so fun. And when you're on the shore
Yeah.
watching people surf, it's beautiful, but you don't realize all the intricacies and that like community that's going on over there in the ocean.
Well, that's part of what segued into like taking those retreats that were so team bonding into what I'm doing now, and in creating offsites. But it's like there's something that hits when you're out there in the water with this group of people, and like a sea turtle pops up, and like maybe we do it when the sun is setting, and there's this golden glow that is on the ocean like that. Yeah, you kind of missed out on those aspects, but
Yeah.
when you learn, you'll come back.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
and then we did things like knowledge shares, which Jen, you taught everyone to sabrage, which was really fun.
that's
Knowledge shares were a component of the retreat where basically people would share something that they were an expert in that would elevate everybody else, give them a new tip or trick or skill. And but the number one criteria was that it was something that lit you up to share about. And obviously, Jen being the queen of sabrage, yeah, that was pretty funny. Yeah.
yeah. Um, And what about, let's actually go back. So this is obviously UX and coffee, and you had a prior career in UX. Can you say a little bit about that and where you were before you made the career change?
Yeah, totally. So I worked for Facebook for about 4 years. And over the course of that time, really gained this skills in being a UX researcher. And so I worked for different teams. I first got placed on the ads team. I actually started with this amazing program that Facebook put on, and it was very like such a great training. It's the UX Research Associate program, and so I got in through that program, and where it takes people who have basically been working a few years and like trains them the UX way in Facebook. And so I yeah, worked on the ads team, which was a very different experience. Very unique like experience. Then I worked on a Goodwill team, and then I really craved coming back to New York. I was out in San Francisco, like the Bay Area, for a year, and I was just like missing New York so much. So after the research associate program concluded, I tried to get back to New York, and so I switched teams to internal products, which weren't as sexy, to be honest with you. Like when you're interviewing employees on how they, find how they operate a knowledge base to find like the information they need to, to proceed properly with support tickets and stuff like that. It's not quite as glamorous, but it's funny because the skills there, though, the ingrained research skills still serve me well. Up, and I'm purple. Sorry. That's not to do with your thing. Occasionally my camera turns purple. Sorry. Just the way it's going to go. It's just the way it goes. Just roll with the punches.
Does it go back if you turn the camera like off and on?
I have to leave and come back in.
Oh, bummer. We don't want to do that. That's all right.
Yeah. It's okay. I'll just be purple. It'll be, people will look at it and be like, why is this?
I know. Is there like, can I turn on a cool filter?
Oh, yeah.
I don't think so. I'm still learning how to use this StreamYard. That's all right.
You know what happened is because, well, true story, because now I have my own business, I got this promotion to go with a Dell instead of an Apple. So I'm with a Dell computer, and this Dell just occasionally turns me purple, and it's just kind of one of those things you gotta live with now when you're buying your own computers. It's kind of life,
Oh man, I'm sure it can be fixed.
Great computer, except for this. Yeah, well, yeah. I could go on, but let's not.
Anyway, the skills of being a researcher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what was so interesting, I'll share this, that because I was thinking about what to talk to you about, and this is something that's very relevant that came up yesterday. Is I was speaking with another professional that so I have a company called Executive Offsites now, where I basically create like world-class team building experiences for people to improve their communication, and then also really just have fun together, but like intentional fun that'll actually further their relationships and their team. And so I was speaking with this other guy who also does consulting with helping teams improve their employee engagement, and but he does long-term projects. And does not do offsites. But anyway, point being, we're talking about like before I do my offsites, I do a survey. I do snowball sampling of IDIs, in-depth interviews. Like this is all the same skill set that was ingrained in me at Facebook that I'm actually so grateful for. And what was so fascinating from this professional's, they were talking about how they were doing focus groups, and like a lot of the then basically if one person brought up an issue, everybody else would kind of jump on the bandwagon, which yes, that's what we know is kind of the flaw of focus groups, right? Is it kind of creates a lot of that group think. And so it was just interesting to see how like even in the nuances of of just how we approach like our interviewing for like the challenges in the workplace, like those research skills still serve me well. Of like I've always preferred IDIs, and like most, I know you've done focus group stuff before, but like I think most UX researchers, right, will prefer IDIs because of the depth we get into, because of the lack of the group think. And it was just interesting to see that play out. And then he there's this amazing was saying so this individual shared with me that some of the feedback on the interviewing um, was that was that that he was getting was that he could potentially be combative, and because of interrupting people. And I said, well, one thing I learned was like, when if you're going to interrupt people within interviews, which you absolutely do, you preface it with like, hey, I may interrupt you over the course of this. Like, it's not because I'm not interested in hearing what you have to say. It's just because for the sake of time, we need to move on. And it's just so fascinating to me how that being ingrained in me for 4 years, like he was like, oh, that would solve everything. Like it was just like, yes, these little nuances. And like for that, so grateful, for the training that I got. That's still useful today. And like then I was able to impart that wisdom or that little trick for him, and now it's going to help him.
Totally, totally. I know. I think about when I'm teaching people how to do in-depth interviews and how to, or usability studies, and how you have to stay quiet and but yet show that you're listening, and how to do that well. And oftentimes it's just and that's enough to get the participant to understand that you are listening and that their verbalizations are important, and that keeps them going. That translates into human communication. It's like when somebody is telling you a story, when your partner is telling you a story, just listen and say, The point isn't to interrupt and jump in. And when I teach people about giving this kind of verbal feedback, I tell them, practice. You don't have to practice in an interview, like in a usability study. These are people who are just getting started. I'll say practice it when you're listening to your friend or your partner, or, somebody tell you a story. Practice, because it's hard. We want to jump in, right? We want to insert our own stories, but to be able to just listen and actively listen, it is a skill. So yeah, it's interesting how a number of things translate from our research skills, from our research days, into other roles.
Totally. And the active listening aspect of just like, especially when you have a different opinion, like that translates to, we're doing a usability study, and this guy, like whoever my participant is like making the mistake we don't want to make, right? And you got to sit there and like zip it up, and like just watch. Okay, yeah, show me how you do that, right? And it's creating the space and the acceptance for people to make the mistakes that engineers and product managers in the back room are like, why are you doing that, and and I think that translates so well to like any kind of accepting any opinion that's very different, right, than yours, and like, okay, yeah, tell me about that.
One of my favorites, and I know you like this one too, one of my favorites that I've taken with me from one of my past companies, one of my past jobs, when I was at Bridgewater. The company, for those of you who know, it's all about radical truth and transparency. And the team that I was working on I was working for Ray Dalio, the principals team, and we were taking these tools that Bridgewater used to allow radical truth and transparency and feedback, in the moment feedback, both critical and positive feedback. And we were taking those tools and taking them outside. So that's where my UX research skills came in. But what I've taken away from there is that kind of, some people call it 360 feedback, but the difficulty, it is so difficult for people to give and receive critical feedback. We're pretty good at like the good job, you did it, hey, great job on that presentation. In general, people are good at giving that and receiving it, even though sometimes, some of us are bashful about it, but we're relatively good at that. It's really, really hard to give and receive critical feedback, especially to give it. Some of us want the feedback. We want it. I'm one of those people, like, give me the feedback. I want to know how to improve, but giving it is really, really hard. that's something that I've brought into my training, my courses when I'm teaching people how to be kick-ass researchers. I'm conducting retreats. As you know, the retreat we put together last year and that we're doing again in August. Remember, one of the final days, we were having dinner and we said, what we're going to do after dinner, we're going to go around the table and everybody's going to give everybody else a piece, at least one piece of critical feedback and positive feedback. And people's faces were like, oh, like I didn't sign up for this. It's really, really difficult, but it turned out to be so beneficial for everyone because it comes from a place of care. It comes from a place of like, I'm going to give you this feedback because I think you can use it to improve. It's not nasty, but it feels that way at first because it's so uncomfortable. But that was one thing go ahead. I took from there. And
Jen, that was one of the, I mean, I don't usually brag, but that was one of the single like most brilliant things we've done. Like is really creating like in that retreat, creating that moment of candor going around the table because it's vulnerable to give it and it's also vulnerable to receive. And when it's done from a place of literally wanting to elevate that person with like that's the intention, that's the motivation, then it's just it creates so much trust. And I've seen now where in the team building experiences I've run too, where there's been moments of that where I've created that feedback and it's just again the same level of care because you have to it's vulnerability on both sides, to look someone in the eye. And like if I could raise my if I had a magic wand and could change one thing in corporate America, well, maybe there'd be a couple things, but but certainly giving feedback to one another like through like in the eye is something that whew, man, I wish more organizations did because what level of trust and like connection that creates, and honesty instead of going around and just sending some anonymized report, whatever. Like it's a lot more heart centered.
yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Have you done that? Oh, like that was before we did that together. That was the first time in a group setting that out like in a kind of workplace group setting that I had ever done that. Had you done that before? Like in person?
I don't know that I've done it in that way. And sometimes in my courses, if it's like a 5-week course or something, I'll have
Yeah.
the students give each other feedback on their presentations. And I think I shared this with you recently. Recently, I did this and I forgot the critical part. And it's like, that's the thing. I gave critical feedback and positive feedback, but I noticed they gave each other positive feedback. Like they were telling each other
Yeah.
the good things they did during their presentation. It was
Mhm.
like, oh, I wish and then in the middle of it, I didn't want to change it. And because you kind of, I feel like you need to prep people and let them know that's coming so they can really think about it. The only other time I think I have done it was in a training I was in where it was a very small group and we gave each other feedback, but I think also that was positive. So I don't think so. That might have been the first time
Yeah.
that I
It was a winner. And like the other thing that and it's so funny because in some of the books I've been reading as well as like you know just it echoes that leaders go first in this. And like in that exercise, we what was beautiful is that we demonstrated how to do it first. So
Yes.
we as the leaders of the retreat went first. And what was cool is we demoed like to each other, right? Like
Yeah.
I went first for giving Jen feedback and then everybody else. So it's kind of you kind of set the bar that like, oh, we're going in with like real stuff here.
Yeah.
This isn't some lollygagging like BS.
Right.
Like this is what I see. Number one thing positive, number one thing negative. And that was really, it set the tone for, wow, there were some ones toward the end that were really powerful.
Yeah.
That I hope are sticking with the people that,
I know. I hope so too. I tell you, my like, it's funny what you remember and what you stick to. One of the pieces of feedback I got during that retreat was, and it still sticks with me. I got the feedback that like one of the attendees questioned if like I was on drugs because of my mouth movements. And I realized like after getting this feedback, like it's like a anxiety thing where I purse my lips like when I'm listening, and not when I'm speaking, but when I'm listening, I might be like just, I don't know, doing silly things with my lips, but I just never realized it. And then it made me think, and now I'm hyper aware of it. And when I feel myself doing that, I'm like, because I'm giving the wrong impression. And I don't want to.
Was that in the form or was that around the table?
No, that was around the table. And I was just like, oh my gosh. I was like, thank you so much. It reminds me of
I don't want to be acting like I'm on drugs. What do you know in a work setting? Thanks for that, as opposed to talk behind my back and like whatever,
Right? Or like, imagine he had left and just thought I was like on drugs all the time. He even gave some concrete examples of like in his town where there are druggies, like they do this kind of thing. I was like, oh my God. But it reminded me also of like, when giving presentations, I recommend all the time that people record themselves because they'll see themselves doing things. And like my classic is I've seen myself talking and I call them my T-Rex arms. Like my arms are right here and I don't realize it because this feels very comfortable. But then now when I'm giving presentations, I remember seeing myself and I just like open up a bit, right? And it's like, this looks normal as opposed to this. But it's the power of recording yourself, watching, give yourself feedback, be critical with yourself, ask people for feedback. I recommend people do this in the workplace. Find somebody in the room. It could be your manager. It could be a peer that you have a good relationship with. Tell them I'm working on improving my presentation skills, or you don't tell them anything. You just say, please give me feedback, but give me the critical feedback. Like I'm really working on improving. So like, don't be afraid to ask people for the feedback. You don't have to wait to do a retreat with me or Kendall to do this kind of activity. You could do it with peers, you can do it with people and be ready to receive it. Know that it's coming from a loving place. Obviously, don't ask somebody who you have some sort of conflict with. Like do it with somebody who you feel comfortable with. And then, and be ready to give it, so if you have this relationship with somebody like a peer at work, you can do that for each other.
Yeah. And, you mentioned it earlier too, around reviewing tape. Like, I forget what we were talking about, but yeah, it's just reviewing tape, whether it's interviews or like my face doesn't lie too. It's like something I've just had to grow to accept. But it's also just being cognizant of like, even right now, like my eye movements and stuff, and what's interesting leaving the UX role and now having my own business is like my review is no longer UX research sessions, although I'm actually going to translate that skill set even further from, obviously it's part of my intake process, but I also want to start to do things like this. Like this is utilizing your interviewing skills, it's great. Right. Yeah. And, but for me too, like where I'm at in sales, it's actually reviewing sales calls and like getting that on video with a sales coach and then being able to identify those weak places. It's so fascinating too. Like that is so vital and it's been a really breakthrough thing for me is to get that level of coaching on that type of stuff. Yeah. Anyway, reviewing tape.
Yeah, tape. By the way, we're dating ourselves. Reviewing digital recordings. Now,
yeah,
not tapes anymore. I do this with folks I coach who want to practice interview questions. I suggest to them, like, if you want, go ahead and record this so that they can go back and watch themselves answer the interview questions. Because first of all, it's, the actual responses, but second of all, it is the body, the eyes, the face. and seeing what you look like, because we don't often do that. I mean, sometimes on Zoom, but we don't want to be obsessed looking at what we look like. We want to engage in this conversation. So yeah, recording during any kinds of these kinds of things and getting feedback from somebody else, or even just being critical with yourself, I think is so important.
And just being aware of how you come across. So I'll share a little anecdote. So before I got the job with Facebook, I had a string of interviews that just didn't work out. And it's because every time they would ask me a question that I didn't know the answer to, this is how my face would be. like just a deer in headlights. Like this girl has, just like scared shitless. And so yeah, needless to say, those interviews didn't work out. And then lo and behold, though, I learned to, because I did review tape, I'll say tape of myself. I would do push-ups and I would put amp music on before interviews going forward. And I'd have these little sticky notes that were like smile, and stuff like that.
Nice.
It's just so funny to see the things you do to kind of, when you do have that constructive feedback, the things you need to do for yourself,
Yeah,
specific to yourself to overcome your challenges. Funny.
totally. Um, I wanted to ask, so, all right, let me take a step back. So I'm sure you're aware of what's going on in the UX world. There have been a lot of layoffs. There are currently a lot of job postings, which is awesome. I'm seeing what I predicted in my crystal ball, which I'm so grateful for. There was a lot of tightening of the belt and companies reducing resources, but now there are a lot of job postings again. So I'm hoping that as we go into Q2, a lot of these folks who are looking for UX jobs get those jobs. However, there are folks have asked me, and there have been some discussions around leaving UX. Like maybe this is the time to leave UX. The industry seems crazy. And usually, what I say to people who are thinking about leaving is, if you want to leave, sure, now's the time. Like if you're really not invested, if this isn't the thing you want to do, then yeah, this is a great time, because we're saturated right now with a lot of people who are looking for work and fewer jobs. And also, I haven't said it this explicitly, but like, if you're going to be lazy about it, then please leave. Like if you think you're just going to take a course or two and land a job at Facebook, like, come on, you got to do a little bit of work, right?
Oh,
I want to ask you what you think about, if people really do decide, I want to leave UX, I want to go do something else. Like you left a great field, despite what's happening right now. Like it still is a lucrative field, and like these big tech jobs, you left a big tech job to do something that you're super passionate about now. Do you have words of advice for people who are thinking about leaving, who have definitely decided? Like, what do you say to these people about, what you've been through, and how their direction? And I love how you've talked about how some of the skills translate. I think that's
mhm.
important to think about. But yeah, anything else that you want to share about that?
I mean, what's interesting, I'm recalling a conversation I had with my skip um, a few months before I left, where um, I was already like working on I was already creating helping out with our offsite days, our team building days. And like, I was like, wow, would there be a job where I'd be able to do something like this? Like investigate the problems of the teams and then be able to design a solution for an in-person experience, to help resolve some of those challenges. So I was already getting like starting to see that as an opportunity, like get myself pulled there a little bit. And yeah, and it's just uh sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Yeah, and like I just I know what I was gonna say. And I think I just started to realize that that was probably more in line with my purpose, than like
Mhm.
doing UX research. Like what was really giving, and that's the thing, is I've pivoted careers into something that's much more purpose driven for me. like, resolving conflict in teams, and making sure their teams are having great experiences together, because we spend so much of our work lives together. So I would say, for people who are maybe considering leaving, it's just like, you know, for me, I mean, there's the great experience of doing research, the cushy job of making good money and all that, and then there's figuring out a way, like, if that's your purpose, great. If there's, something else that pulls you, that has that requires some of the skills, or you can utilize some of those borrowed skills over, like in my case, then, I'm always going to encourage someone to follow their purpose, you know what I mean, and what really drives them and what lights them up, because that's the stuff that's going to, like, give us the juice 20 years from now. Not like, and for some people it's getting it's, maybe it is UX research that drives them, or maybe it's a cushy paycheck. I don't know. But I will say, starting your own business is definitely comes with its challenges. And here we are, couple years later, and I'm finally getting the traction. But it's a tricky thing. I mean, they say it's not for the faint of heart, and it's true.
Yeah. I love that. It's the purpose, and what are you passionate about? I love that. I
Yeah,
mean, that's ultimately why I left too. I found that I was more passionate about training and teaching, and building my teams up into the best UX researchers possible. And it's like, well, why don't I just do this then? Right? I was more
yeah,
passionate about that than I was about doing the research, which is what
totally.
helped me to leave too. But I love also what you just said, that was really vulnerable and honest about, like, just finally getting traction. And it's something I remind myself of every day too, that you don't just, start your own business and, like, most of us anyway, right? It's like you're working on the thing that you're passionate about, and figuring out what that looks like, and trying things and tweaking things. And, even those big tech companies, that's how they started out. They started out in a garage. They didn't start out
Mhm.
this, multi-billion buildings is what I meant to say, but also multi-billion. They didn't start out that way, right? It, like, slowly became that. And that's really important to think about for folks who are starting their own thing, or, venturing out and trying different things.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
will say, the other thing I'll just say too, like, I'll circle back to that conversation I had with someone yesterday, where, like, during that conversation, when I gave the feedback about, kind of how to safe port people, like, hey, I might interrupt you, and then, you know the fact that I, really, I do IDIs versus focus groups, that have more of the group think, like, it also made having that conversation also made me realize, even though it's been like 2+ years since I left Facebook, like, wow, I actually still have, like, a very valuable skill set that others don't, you know? And I was
Yeah.
like, it was like patting myself on the back, like, wow, this is actually really valuable to have my approach, rather than doing, like, the focus groups, etc. So I was like, okay, like, that yeah, is cool when you start to, like, separate yourself from that, or at least in my case, my UX researcher hat is no longer, on as much, but it's like, oh, I still got
Yeah.
it in a way, you know?
For sure. All right. Well, we're over time. Thank you so much. Can you let folks know where they can find out more information about your retreats and your corporate offsites?
Yeah. So executiveoffsites.com. And then you can follow Instagram, executive offsites, or corporate offsites. I have both. But yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Jen.
Kendall. Thanks for joining me. It's been so lovely as usual. I look forward to seeing you very soon in Hawaii again.
Yes. Look
Yes.
forward to that. Yes. Oh, this is fun. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yay. Have a wonderful day. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.